The last thing I remember clearly is the crunch, that sound, metal folding against itself, the back of my car snapping sideways. It hit me harder than the impact did, because I'd checked my mirror a half second before it happened, and there was nobody there. No car, no truck, no guardrail, just the fog pressing against my rear window like a wall of white static. My name is Esio Jinho. I'm 28 years old, and I need to tell you about 3 nights in my life that I cannot explain. Nights that I've spent years trying to rationalize, to dismiss, to forget. I haven't been able to forget any of them. Not the highway outside Gangneung, not the trail behind my hometown, not the bay. The worst part isn't what I saw. The worst part is what I've slowly started to believe, that whatever it wasn't random, that the fog wasn't just weather, that something inside it was watching me. Let me start from the beginning. 3 years ago, I was living in Seoul, working a mid-level logistics job I didn't love, sharing a flat with 2 roommates I barely knew. My parents lived in Sako on the northeast coast, 8 hours away if you took the Inland Expressway, 5.5 if you took Route 7 along the East Sea. I always took Route 7, even at night, especially at night. There's something about that road in the dark. The sea is always there to your right, invisible but present. You can hear it if you crack the window. This low rolling sound underneath everything. The mountains crowd the left side of the road, and between them, it feels like you're driving through the seam of the world. I left my parents' place on a Sunday evening after my father's birthday dinner. I'd been planning to stay the night, but my mother had started an argument over something small, the way she always does when she doesn't want to say she missed me, and I decided it was easier to just drive. I told myself I'd sleep better in my own bed. I was wrong about that. The first 2 hours were fine. Route 7 narrows considerably once you get south of Yongyan. 2 lanes, tight coastal curves, not a lot of lighting. I'd driven it dozens of times. I had the radio on low and a coffee from a rest stop going cold in the Kufolda. I was somewhere near Jumanjin when the fog arrived, not gradually. That's the thing I want you to understand. It didn't roll in the way fog normally does, creeping at the edges of your vision, diffusing slowly. One moment the road was clear, and within maybe 4 or 5 minutes, I couldn't see past the front of my own hood. I slowed to 50, then 40, then 30. The radio signal had dropped out. No cell service, no other cars in either direction. Just me and 2 beams of headlight dissolving into gray nothing. That's when I saw the first one. A figure, standing on the right shoulder of the road, maybe 15 meters ahead. I almost didn't see it in time. Just this shape, dark and still, facing the road directly. I slowed almost to a stop as I passed. He didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't turn his head to track my car. He was tall, dressed dark, and he just stood there like he'd been planted. No broken down car behind him, no phone in his hand, nothing around him that explained why a person would be standing in that spot on that road at that hour in that fog. I kept driving. I told myself it was nothing. A hitchhiker, someone waiting for a ride that was already on its way. I told myself a dozen sensible things as I picked my speed back up, and then, 12 minutes later, I saw him again. Same build, same dark clothes, same rigid posture, same absolute stillness. Only this time he was on the left side of the road. I said something out loud to myself in the car. I don't remember what, exactly. Something between a prayer and a curse. There was no logical way. I was the only car on this road. There were no cross streets, no turnoffs, no parallel paths. For this man to be standing ahead of me on the opposite shoulder, he would have had to somehow gotten past me without me seeing him. In a fog so thick I could barely see the center line. I told myself it was a different person, a coincidence, someone else out for a walk at 10 at night in zero visibility on a coastal highway with no sidewalk. I didn't believe it, but I told myself anyway. This time, as I passed, I looked. I shouldn't have. His head turned and found my eyes through the window. Not slowly. His head snapped to me like it had been waiting for permission. Like the only thing it had been doing this whole time was waiting for me to look. I floored it. I got up to nearly 70 before the fog forced me back down. My hands were shaking on the wheel. My breathing had gone shallow, in that way it does when your body knows something before your brain catches up. And then, 3 minutes later, I came around a gentle curve and my headlights found someone standing in the middle of the road. I stopped. He was wearing a dark hood, pulled low. I couldn't see his face. He didn't move. He didn't react to my headlights. He just stood there in the center of my lane, like he'd been waiting for me specifically. I sat there for what felt like a full minute but was probably 20 seconds, flashing my brights. Nothing. He didn't move a single centimeter. I put the car in reverse to back up and figure out my options. And that's when I checked the rearview mirror. There was someone behind me. Not a car. A person. Walking toward my car through the fog. Steadily. Calmly. Like they had all the time in the world. I don't remember making a decision. I just acted. I pulled hard left, crossing into oncoming lanes, swinging around the figure in front of me. He didn't move out of the way. He didn't even flinch. I went around him and I drove. 20 seconds later, something hit my car. The impact was violent enough that I almost lost control. The back right corner of the car jolted hard, that sickening sound of metal collapsing. I kept the wheel straight through, pure instinct. I checked the mirror. Nothing. Empty road. Empty fog. I drove until I hit the expressway interchange, and when the fog lifted and I could finally breathe again, I told myself what I needed to tell myself. Exhaustion, stress, a sleep-deprived brain playing tricks on an isolated stretch of road. Probably I'd clipped a guardrail post in the panic and didn't register it. That's what I believed until I got home and walked around the car. The rear bumper was destroyed, a dent running almost the full width of it. The kind of damage you get from something broad and heavy hitting you straight on. Not a post, not a guardrail edge, and no paint transfer. None. If another car had hit me, there would be paint. There's always paint. I stood in my building's parking garage staring at that dent for a long time. I filed a report with the traffic authority the next morning. Not because I thought it would go anywhere. Just because I needed to say it out loud to someone, to make it real. To confirm to myself that I hadn't invented the entire night. I tried to move on. For a while, I managed. I threw myself into work, got a promotion, moved into my own place in Mapo, went to full years without thinking about that road, at least not during daylight. Then spring came, and my company gave everyone a week off for the holiday stretch. I went back home, back to the town I grew up in, Gimpo, west of Seoul. One of those suburban places that's technically the city but feels like the edge of nothing. My parents had moved there when I was 12. The town had a few restaurants, a CGV, a lot of identical apartment towers, and not much else. My friends all had different schedules. My parents worked. I had a week and nothing to fill it with. I'd been trying to get healthier, cutting back on drinking, trying to sleep better, getting back into running the way I had in high school. So I decided that was how I'd spend the week. Morning gym sessions, afternoon runs. On the third day, Tuesday, I went looking for an old trail I used to run in high school. Behind the neighborhood, there was a small patch of forest, not big enough to really get lost in, but big enough to feel like you were somewhere else for 20 minutes. A single dirt path that looped through the trees and came back out near my street. I'd run it probably 300 times growing up. I stepped outside around 5 o'clock, and the fog was there, not the thin city haze you get sometimes in the morning. This was dense, layered, the kind that doesn't burn off because it's not really weather. It's more like the air itself has turned opaque. I could see maybe 10 or 12 meters before everything dissolved. Something tugged at me. A memory of that road, that fog. But I pushed it away. I was home. I knew this trail by heart. There was no reason to be afraid of a running loop I'd done since I was 15. I told myself I was not someone who scared easily. I laced up and I went. The neighborhood portion was fine. Quiet streets, distant sounds of traffic, the fog sitting low and still around the streetlights. I cut into the trail, where the path enters the tree line between two old apartment fences, and the world went even quieter. Trees have a way of eating sound. You lose the city immediately in there. It's one of the things I'd always loved about that stretch. I ran 1 kilometer, 1.5, my watch ticking off the distance steadily. By 2 kilometers, I should have been approaching the back curve of the loop, the small rise before the path feeds back out to the street. I knew it was coming. I was looking for it. It didn't come. My watch hit 2.5 kilometers, trees on both sides, same dirt underfoot, no rise, no curve, no exit. 3 kilometers. The loop is 3 kilometers total. At 3 kilometers, I should have been standing outside. I was still in the woods. I stopped. I stood there, hands on my knees, catching my breath, and I tried to think clearly. I'm not superstitious. I'm not someone who panics easily. There had to be an explanation. GPS error. The tree canopy interrupting the signal. The old watch miscounting. Fine. Okay. I was probably just not as far along as it was telling me, but I'd been running. I'd been running at a consistent pace on a path I knew. My body knew where I was in this loop, the same way your tongue knows where all your teeth are automatically, without thinking. And my body was telling me I should have been out already. I made the call, turn around, retrace the path back to the entrance, get out the way I'd come in. I turned and started running. That was when I heard it. I need to try to describe this sound, and I want to be precise because I think precision matters here. It wasn't a voice. It wasn't an animal sound. It was lower than both of those. A sustained, wavering drone that swelled up and pulled back in slow intervals, like a horn being played by something that had never heard music. Human in its register, but inhuman in every other quality. And it was close, not in front of me, behind me, and getting closer. I ran faster. I was already 4 kilometers deep into what should have been a 3-kilometer loop, and now I was pushing 5, and my legs were burning, and my lungs were burning, and the sound was still there, still keeping pace, still filling that awful rhythm of rise and fall. I looked over my shoulder twice. Fog, just fog and darkness and trees. Whatever it was, I couldn't see it. I could only hear it, and the hearing was somehow worse. At some point, I don't know exactly when, my watch had become meaningless. I saw the tree line break, a gap, streetlight beyond it. I burst through onto asphalt and nearly fell to my hands and knees with the effort of stopping. I doubled over and just breathed. And then I stood up and looked back into the trail entrance. It was there, standing just inside the tree line, where the shadows start. Tall, much too tall. I'm 1 meter 85. This thing cleared 2 meters, easy, maybe more. Dark. Not wearing dark clothes, dark as in it absorbed light rather than reflected it. Standing perfectly still except for this slow, gentle swaying that was somehow the most disturbing part. The droning sound had stopped. It just watched me, or at least, that's what it felt like. That particular quality of being observed that you feel in your spine before your eyes confirm it. I ran home. I didn't look back again. I told my parents. They said it was probably a tall person trying to scare me. A prank. Maybe someone who'd seen me go in and decided to mess with a runner alone in the fog. I didn't argue. I didn't have the energy. But I kept thinking about the sound, the way it had matched my speed exactly. For kilometer after kilometer, you can run fast or slow to match someone's pace. But to make that noise continuously, at that volume, while sprinting to keep up, that's not possible. Not for a person. And the height. I've never seen a human being that tall. I want to pause here, because there's something I didn't put together until much later. Something that only clicked after the third incident. Both times, it was the fog. Not just fog as a backdrop. The fog was specific, unusual, the kind of fog that locals said they'd never seen before, in places where the weather was well known and predictable. The kind of fog that came from nowhere and didn't behave the way fog behaves. I started wondering, very quietly and in the back of my mind, whether the fog was the event, not the setting, the event itself. I'm getting ahead of myself. Last year, late October, my old university friend Doyon convinced me to take a weekend trip to Sunshine Bay on the south coast. He'd been saying for 2 years that we should do it, paddle through the estuary, see the migratory birds, spend a night in the town. We finally made it happen. Doyon had grown up on the water. His father ran a fishing operation out of Yosu. He knew tides, navigation, boat behavior. He was, by any reasonable measure, the person you'd want next to you if something went wrong on the water. We launched Saturday morning from a rental spot near the outer basin. Fiberglass touring kayaks, a GPS unit, a compass, snacks. The plan was simple. Paddle out toward the reed flats, find a sandbar for lunch, head back before the afternoon tide shifted. The fog was thick. We both acknowledged it, but neither of us flagged it as a problem. Coastal fog on Sunshine Bay in October is completely normal. We expected it to thin by mid-morning. It didn't thin. About an hour out, we heard the oars, not paddles, oars, that heavy, deliberate thwomp and pull sound of someone rowing a wooden boat. It was coming from somewhere off to our right, maybe 30 or 40 meters in the fog. Do-young called out, "Hey, anyone there?" The rowing continued at exactly the same rhythm. No response, no change in pace. We figured it was a local. Fishermen checking crab pots maybe. The fog distorting sound, making them seem closer or further than they were. We kept paddling, but over the next 30 minutes, something became impossible to ignore. The rowing sound didn't move. It stayed at the same distance and the same angle relative to us no matter which direction we went. When we turned east, it turned with us. When we angled back toward shore, it angled with us. Something that big, in that fog, maintaining that exact distance, it's not something you can do casually. It requires either perfect knowledge of your position relative to another boat, or something else entirely that I can't name. Then the fog thinned for about 3 seconds. 3 seconds was enough. Off to the right, maybe 25 meters, a small wooden rowboat, dark hull, nearly black, one figure seated at the oars, still rowing, not looking at us. Then the fog closed again. We headed for shore, both of us, without having to say it. We hit the shallows, climbed out, pulled our kayaks up the beach. Doyon walked a little way down the shoreline while I was catching my breath. He stopped, called me over. Footprints, fresh barefoot prints in the wet sand, coming out of the water and heading up the beach. You could see water still pooling in the heel impressions. Whoever made them had come ashore minutes ago, maybe less. They didn't stop at the beach. They walked up toward the tree line, turned, followed the shore in our direction, and then cut into the forest. I followed the prints backward, against their direction of travel. They came from down the shore. I told Doyon I wanted to trace them. He didn't want to. We went anyway. About 50 meters down the beach, half pulled up on the sand at an angle, was the rowboat. Same shape, same nearly black wood. The oars were resting inside it, wet. Doyon grabbed my arm before I could get any closer. His voice was very flat and very calm, the way voices get when someone is genuinely frightened and working hard not to show it. He said we were leaving. He said he didn't care what was in that boat. He said get back to the kayaks now. We left. On the drive back that evening, neither of us talked much. At some point, Doyon said, very quietly, whoever that was got to shore before us, walked to the exact spot where we landed, and still had time to disappear before we arrived. He said, in a rowboat, slower than our kayaks. He said, I don't want to think about what that means. Neither do I, Doyen. Neither do I. Here's the thing about the human mind. It is extraordinarily good at insisting on normal. After the highway, I accepted hallucination plus accidental collision. After the woods, I accepted GPS malfunction, a tall stranger, maybe a prank. After the bay, I accepted odd coincidence, a strange local, natural coastal fog. Each time, I found a version of events that my rational brain could hold on to. Each time, I put it in a box and closed the lid. But at some point last winter, I was sitting alone in my apartment and I just let myself think about all three of them at once. Not separately, together, and the boxers fell apart. In all three incidents, the fog was abnormal. Not seasonal fog, not predictable coastal fog, fog that locals found remarkable, fog that arrived suddenly and sat wrong and didn't behave. In all three incidents, there were figures, humanoid but wrong in some specific way, wrong height, wrong stillness, wrong response to being seen. In all three incidents, I wasn't just observed, I was positioned. On the highway, I was boxed in. In the woods, I was drawn deeper and then chased back out. On the bay, I was followed to shore with what felt like precision. And in all three incidents, the thing, whatever it was, disappeared without explanation at exactly the moment it was about to be fully confronted. What do you do with that? I'm not a superstitious person. I'm not someone who watches ghost hunting shows and takes them seriously. I studied engineering. I believe in physical cause and effect, but I also know what damage to the rear of a car looks like when there was nothing behind it to cause the damage. I know what wet footprints look like when they've just come out of water. I know how it feels to run with something matching your pace in perfect fog for 1.5 kilometers. I don't have an explanation. I have a feeling. The feeling is this: whatever is in that fog, it's not confused about what it's doing. It's not random. There's a logic to the way it moves, the way it positions itself, the way it watches and retreats. It's operating with some kind of intention, and it seems to find me. I've told people these stories, mostly in pieces, mostly after a drink or two, when the lights were low enough to make it feel safe. Everyone responds the same way. They look for the rational explanation first. When they can't find one that holds up completely, they suggest elaborate pranks, or sleep deprivation, or the way that isolated environments do strange things to the mind. Maybe they're right, but I stopped trying to fully convince myself of that a while ago. What I've made peace with is simpler. Some things happen to you that you will never fully understand. You can spend years reverse engineering them, running them through every logical framework you have, testing every possible explanation, and sometimes, at the end of all that effort, you just have the experience sitting there, unchanged, unsolvable. That's uncomfortable. We're not built to tolerate unsolved things, especially when they're frightening. But the alternative, forcing a bad explanation to fit so you can feel settled, that's its own kind of dishonesty. So here's where I've landed. I don't drive Route 7 at night anymore. I don't run alone in fog. And when the weather gets strange on the water, I paddle for shore. No discussion, not because I'm certain of what I saw, but because whatever it was, it found me in the fog all 3 times, and I'm not willing to give it a 4th chance. There's something worth taking away from all of this that has nothing to do with the supernatural. We're taught to distrust our instincts when they conflict with logic, to push through discomfort, to explain away the thing that feels wrong because nothing looks wrong on the surface. Every single time I was in danger in that fog, real or imagined, I had a clear warning signal before things escalated. The feeling that something was off, the reluctance to look, the knowledge that I should have pulled over, should have stayed home, should have turned around earlier. And every single time, I ignored it. We do this constantly, not just in fog on empty roads, in relationships, in jobs, in situations where the surface looks fine but something underneath is pulling at us, trying to get our attention. The fog didn't create what happened on those nights. It just removed everything else until all I had left was what was already there. Sometimes that's all it takes. Pay attention before the fog rolls in.